Please welcome to the show, Mary Simon. Great to meet you. How are you?
I'm fine. How are you?
Very well. Come on in.
I'm breaking a myth here.
You're breaking a myth. What's that myth?
We used to be called savages.
Right.
In the Royal Proclamation. And then we were called Eskimos.
Right.
And then we started using our own name for ourselves, which is Inuit.
Inuit. And Inuk is the singular, right?
The singular. And everybody thinks that we kiss with our noses, but we don't.
So the cheek to cheek. I like that.
No, you sniff like that.
That's it?
That's it.
What are you sniffing for?
Your loved one.
Okay. Oh, fair enough.
Yeah.
You just wouldn't recognize them? Is that the deal?
No. It's just our way, our culture.
I'm just kidding. Thanks for coming.
I always watch you sitting like this.
Right.
I love your show.
Thank you so much.
But you know what? We sit like this.
On the floor?
Yes.
Yeah, but the problem is we're not lit for the floor. Maybe next time we'll do that. We'll sit on the floor.
All right.
Thank you for coming on the show. I really appreciate this.
Oh, I love to be here.
You've done a great job of expressing to Canadians some key differences that are important. When people talk about First Nations, everybody thinks that includes all Aboriginal peoples.
Yes.
But with Inuit, it's different. I mean, there are key differences, aren't there?
Yes, very much so. We fully respect the other Aboriginal peoples in Canada, but we are a distinct people with our own culture and our own language. And we are a coastal people. We live along the Arctic coast. And we very much depend on the marine life for our food and livelihood. And that's why I'm wearing my sealskin.
Very controversial vest, but well done. You know?
Well, not controversial for us, though.
No, of course not. Of course not. Yeah. But it is certainly part of the conversation. What's interesting about also there are some significant challenges in as far as Inuit people currently. And if you take a look at something that you've talked about, the food insecurity rates are incredibly high. The graduation rate is incredibly low. Yeah. This is something that's really important for you to get out, isn't it?
Oh, extremely important. Our living standards are much lower than the rest of Canada. So when you live in a developed country and you're in a region that's pretty undeveloped when you consider the services that are provided to us.
Well, 70% food insecurity is very high.
Well, that is sometimes caused by the cost of living. The cost of living is like 3 or 4 times higher than the rest of Canada. And you don't take into consideration that the fact that our culture is a hunting society. And when people can't go out hunting, they usually have to buy the cheapest food they can buy in the store, which is sometimes junk food.
Right.
So that's where some of the insecurity comes in, the food insecurity in our north, and we're working very hard to try and lower the cost of living up north, but it's very difficult.
Well, one of the interesting things about the situation for the Inuit is that you are on strategically important land, and that a lot of people talk about Arctic sovereignty, and a lot of people talk about possible drilling, and a lot of people talk about what's happening up there. And there's a lot of space, and that's where you live.
That's right.
And so it puts you in a very different situation than maybe other people in First Nations communities across the country, because there is going to have to be some relationship between you and the government and, I suppose, the military and the rest of the Arctic communities, aren't there?
That's right. And, you know, we're confronted with issues like sovereignty, because the Arctic is now being discussed in many ways. One is resource-rich development that is going to be coming in the future. Once the ice melts, countries are talking about how they're going to develop all the resources, and we want to be partners in that, but not just in terms of the resource and the money, but also we want to make sure that we're safeguarding our life and the communities and the environment, and that the developers are using the highest standards and high quality equipment that people use around the world. You know, we want the best of the best if there's going to be any development in the north, and part of that is to work along with the developers so that we can provide jobs for our people. 70% jobless rate is not an uncommon thing in the north, and some of it is related to the fact that we're not educating. Our kids aren't getting through school. Like, they often drop out in grade 9 or 8, 9 or 10 or even younger.
Why is that? Why is the graduation level so high, so low?
I think it has a number of reasons. One of the things is that, governments have always provided education to us. And a lot of the education came from the South. And then the children were sent to residential schools. Some of them never returned home. So education wasn't always seen as a good thing amongst our people, the academic side of education, because we taught our own children in our own culture the way we teach our young, which is based on an oral history. Mm-hmm. And we depend very much on the elders because of that. So the system that is there now has never been embraced by the people, by the parents. And we are in the process of working, at least I am at the national level, with a national committee to revitalize the education system so that people take ownership of the system that is there for them to educate their children. Because if we can't educate our young, all that development that's going to go on around us is going to bypass us.
Is there enough infrastructure in place within your own community to run the education system? Is there enough institutional knowledge to take on that responsibility?
We have enough infrastructure in most communities, in Nunavut and in Nunavik and in Nunatsiavut, for schools. Housing is a huge issue, especially in Nunatsiavut. There's in northern Labrador, there's a serious issue. And in other regions as well, there's a big shortage. But in terms of schools, we're not doing too badly, but the content of the education system has to be revitalized in a way that it is rooted in our language and our culture. So that people will start to take ownership of the education system.
We saw it play out in this country, in the province of Quebec. We saw language laws that were incredibly controversial. And there was a big divide between English and French Canada, it appeared, for a long time. But the French-speaking people in Quebec were defiant, didn't care what anybody thought, and to a degree, it's worked. They have preserved the culture in Quebec. They have a blossoming industry in terms of arts because the language has been supported.
Well, it's also the official language of Canada.
But so, is that a tack you guys have to take, you think?
Well, no, I don't think we're defiant, but Inuktitut is the third strongest language, Aboriginal language, left in Canada. So we want to make sure that we keep strengthening it because it has been deteriorating, just like any other Aboriginal language in Canada. So we've made a lot of effort to bring it back into our schools and into our homes.
And why is it important?
Well, it's the base of your identity, of who you are. Like an Inuk is an Inuk because they have their culture and their language. We can be just as competitive as the next door neighbor without losing our culture and our language. Mm-hmm. And that's what we're trying to balance, is that we're confronted with all this new technology. Our kids are very savvy with social networking. In fact, they use it an awful lot these days, and just like all young people across Canada. So it's to bring all that into our culture without destroying our identity as a people. And that's the balancing act that we're trying to figure out through some of it through the national strategy on education, that we now have a vision of what we want.
A lot of people like to, in positions of spokespersons' roles, or politicians love to campaign on platitudes, and they love to talk about, and the word you hear all the time is hope, hope, hope. And I heard you say hope is not a plan, which I thought is fantastic.
Yeah.
Is there any role for hope in this? Like, does it play an important role at any level?
We have hope in our lives. I mean, we're not in a hopeless situation. We have a lot of challenges that we face, and people are working very hard every day to make a livelihood that will allow them to live comfortably in their communities. We were nomadic people, but we now live in communities, and we depend on material goods just like you do.
Is that challenge an easy one to get past? Community-based living?
Well, that created part of the challenge, because we were nomadic people and we were very self-sufficient. We had our own spirituality. But when the government decided to put us into communities, people weren't used to living in communities. So the colonization process and the residential schools era really destroyed some of the identity. So those types of issues have had a severe impact on our people, and we are just coming back.
Yeah,
we are just coming back, and now we're poised, really, to take on all these responsibilities.
I'm getting a real sense in the last half a year, that there has been a bit of a turn in the tide with First Nations issues and Inuit issues. You're starting to see the conversation change. Have you noticed it as well?
Yes, I have, and especially on education. Education has become a priority. A lot of it is still a discussion, but from discussion, just like we did with the land claims agreements, the discussion will turn into tangible products, so to speak. Mm-hmm. But it's a long road. Sometimes you have to look back 15 or 20 years and say, oh yes, I made some progress,
Right.
But it's a slow process, but we're a very peaceful people. So sometimes our negotiations, like when Nunavut was negotiating its territory, the Inuit of Nunavut, and the land claims agreement took 20 years, but it was a very peaceful process. There was the only time we were so upset with Bill 101, because in Nunavik, in northern Quebec, which is where I come from, we only spoke Inuktitut and English. There was no French, even though we were in Quebec.
Yeah.
And then when Bill 101 came into law, we were going to be forced to speak French. And we had a fairly big uprising, because it was very, very difficult for especially the older people. I was quite young then. We had demonstrations. We've never, ever had demonstrations. And that was the first time that elders actually cried. They felt it so strongly in their heart that a language was being imposed on them, mm-hmm. when they already had to learn English. And this was a very, very difficult period. And we were able to get an exemption from the Quebec government. So we are exempt from Bill 101, which I'm quite proud to say that I was part of the negotiations.
That's so great to see you. Thank you so much for coming in.
Thank you.
Really
it was lovely to be here.
Thank you. The National Inuit leader, Mary Simon, everybody. We'll be right back. Thank you.